Hello and welcome back. So next for you, we have a panel discussion around banking on artificial intelligence and how AI is impacting the financial services sector. We're thrilled to introduce your panelists, Solon Angel from MindBridge AI, Jeremy Bornstein from Mastercard, Federico Berruti from McKinsey and Company, and we have Debbie Gamble from Interac Corp. And here to ask the questions, please welcome James Briggs, CEO and founder of AI Collaborator. James, over to you all.
Well, thank you all. I'm excited about this panel, and I'm excited about just the conversation. It's kind of amazing the things that we've learned to do with technology over the last year, right? And at the same time, of course, when we see the things that have happened in artificial intelligence, is phenomenal. Some of the changes that it's driving across industries. So I'm looking forward to really getting you guys' opinion on the banking industry and how AI is changing that industry. So why don't we dive in? So my first question to this great panel is, how do you all see AI further transforming or disrupting the nature of competition in the banking industry over the last year and the things that we are looking to come? Jeremy, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks. So hi, everyone. Jeremy Bornstein. I'm a SVP with Mastercard, currently leading our global digital partnerships with the likes of very large international players. I've been in the banking industry for over 20 years, and there have been a couple of recurring themes throughout my career. Two in particular I want to highlight. One, this sort of promised Shangri-La of omni-channel banking, and the second being on the commoditization and debundling or deconstruction of a bank. And we've been talking about this. I remember going back to almost my first day as a junior strategy analyst. And when I worked at a bank to now at a payment network, continue to talk about these two things. I believe omni-channel will happen. We will reach that Shangri-La at some point where you truly can interact anyway and through varieties of channels with a financial institution. We're getting ever closer. The other part on the unbundling of the bank is already happening, and it's going to be hastened by AI even further. Best exemplifying this is P2P payments, how I pay back someone else in the US, whether that's through Venmo or WhatsApp. The most popular ways, although the bank solution is gaining in popularity, but the most popular ways are not through banks. And you don't really think about where my money's coming from, just where it's going to and how it's transiting there. Is a great example. I think what Google is doing with their Plex product that they launched or are launching soon also is showing that advancement of the commoditization of the bank. My bank is Google. It's not necessarily the 11 FIs that sit behind it. And so I'm already starting to commoditize and unbundle the DDA or the demand deposit account that sits below it. And AI, I think, is going to bring this to the next level where consumers are no longer going to think about who's the provider of that ledger where my money sits, or who's providing the ultimate credit that manifests in some 16-digit number or whatever we're going to be using in the medium term. We're already seeing it with companies like Digit that are, I interact with Digit. Digit's what saves my money for me. I don't really think about all the banks that's underneath it where it's looking and seeing and pulling money from to save. And so you can almost imagine this future where a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon becomes that interface that I think of as the bank, and what's left is certainly not 30% ROI for a bank underneath it. It's really more commoditized services.
Thank you for that, Jeremy. Debbie, over to you. What are your thoughts?
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Gamble. I am the Chief Innovation Officer for Interac. Actually, we've got a lot of people from Canada on the panel today. So Interac is Canada's domestic payment network. And just to kind of echo what Jeremy just mentioned, I think, data has obviously been exploding for a number of years now and has the potential to disrupt every industry, and banking is not immune to that. I think those of us who spent a good part of our career in the banking industry have known that banks and financial services providers have had data, lots of data for a long time. But I think it's really been the kind of large tech players that have spurred on this notion of leveraging that data, perhaps in different ways. So as some of the examples that Jeremy just mentioned was obviously around how do you get closer to your customer? How do you use that data, not just as a defensive mechanism? So of course, we've been using data for many years to help with security, fraud management, AML, lots of that more defensive, ensuring integrity in the system and risk mitigation. But I think over the last few years, perhaps many of us in the industry have started to really grapple with how we can become a whole lot more offensive using that data and looking at how we can better service our customers, anticipate their needs, perhaps be in a better position to address some of their challenges. So I think looking forward to the conversation today. It's definitely as every industry is being disrupted, but I think there is definitely a theme of opportunity here, and thinking about how we can use some of the amazing tools in the realm of AI to improve the business offering to the market.
Thank you, Debbie. And so, Federico, now we've had Jeremy share a little bit about the unbundling that's going on, and Debbie picked up on the data side. What do you see? What do you see going forward?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm Federico Berruti. I'm a partner based out of Toronto, and I lead McKinsey's automation and AI work in financial services. So very excited to be with you all today. Just to pick up on the great themes that the other panelists raised, I think there's an element here around also what's happening given the COVID-19 pandemic. And, many people are calling, this the AI's before and after moment in a way, because there's been such an incredible acceleration of the adoption of automation and AI technology since the outbreak. And we've run some surveys around this, across a few thousand companies, and 88% of financial services and insurance executives have reported an increased usage of automation and AI since the outbreak. So it's a very significant area, and the estimates are that the acceleration could be as far as 7 to 10 years is what's happened in a matter of weeks and months in that type of adoption. And I think that while the financial services industry and banks and these types of areas have already had, some relatively high degrees of automation, the benefits around digital payments and kind of machine learning and decisioning algorithms have kind of created a bolder push to reimagine the way the work is done, the process journeys in banks, front to back, much more of the underlying operating model elements of the way the work is done, and just driving decisioning algorithms to make this much more seamless. And you take examples, the other colleagues on the panel have talked about payments, which is obviously significant. You also see this in mortgage, in decisioning algorithms, in one-touch fulfillment, and the automation of those journeys, and understanding what customers want upfront from lead generation, AI, and analytics, all the way through these process journeys, to really transform the way that works. And there's a big push on, I think, data and regulatory that we'll discuss more, I think, around the explainability and trustworthiness of these AI models, which I think is a very important point to emphasize around the governance of these elements.
Thank you for that, Federico. So that's a great start to this conversation. But of course, we sort of ended on the data element of this, right? So you can't have a discussion on AI without talking about data. And so And then when you look at the financial services industry, you can't have a discussion about financial services without talking about regulations. So that at that intersection is let's talk about a little bit about data regulations. So Solon, why don't we go over to you? And what do you think about data rights as we're looking at all this amazing innovation that's going on, all these amazing changes in the industry? What do you think the regulatory bodies are going to expect from companies as they look to more rely upon consumers' data in order to make their decisions in this space?
Well, thank you for having me on stage today. So I'm the founder of MindBridge AI, and we built the world's first AI auditor. So I'm also actually one of the members of the International Standards Board working group for technology adoption for financial reporting. And as you know, with Wirecard and a lot of things that happen, now there's increased discussion and pressure on deploying more tools like ours to basically remove humans from the loop on financial filings. And here's what I can tell you. I'm a very humbled, privileged witness as an innovator, and also having regulators that are open to discuss with innovators, such as the International Federation of Accountants. And what's very interesting is that we all talk about the innovator's dilemma, right? Which is you need to keep moving faster, and when you become successful, then you have a problem that you need to acquire smaller innovators, like for example, Facebook with Instagram, to keep relevant. But nobody talks about the regulator's dilemma. And it goes as follows. Even in situations of life and death, like for example, ABS breaks, regulators have a problem. So the ABS technology was created in the late 19th century, right? It was adopted the first time commercially on the Concorde supersonic plane in the 70s. And it was mostly distributed in the early 90s on all commercial cars. And we know ABS brakes saves lives. The regulator only endorsed it in 2003. 100 years after, 20 years after mass adoption, 40 years after the first implementation in commercial space. Lucky for me and for my company, it's not going that slow in financial services, but it's pretty slow, right? So the problem they have, and when you talk to regulators, here's the problem they have. They cannot create legislative material in advance. They need some problems to happen in the marketplace. They need to let innovators and practitioners and corporations experiment. And out of the legislative work and court cases, sometimes, like for example, in the US 7 years ago, a bank in Texas got fined for discriminative lending when they were over-relying on algorithms, right? But they need this to happen first before they take a stance. So the problem with data rights is at the same stage, which is right now, if you ask the pure data scientist view, all data should be available to everyone at any time, right? But then you're giving up privacy, you're giving up security, you're creating a lot of problem. And then if you ask my friends in DeFi, like in digital finance, they tell you, well, that's what we do in the blockchain, who cares, right? So like there's that whole clash happening right now, and it's a very healthy clash, a very strong regulator's dilemma as to how fast should they step in without holding back innovation, but also not coming with a sledgehammer when they should have tweezers, right? Like it's a very fine balance, and I'm very happy not to be a regulator because their job is very hard these days.
Thank you for that, Solon. Debbie, what are your thoughts? What's the balance? What should, as a consumer, we all want to make sure that our data is protected, and that if there is something that is going on with our data, we want to be aware of that. And we also, of course, we have to be concerned about discrimination policies and things like that. So what's the balance? What is the balance that we have to work through as we're moving forward?
Well, I think Solon just touched on some really key points of where we're at. I think I kind of characterize it as data rights and privacy seem to be the new battleground for many industries, certainly including the banking and financial services sector. And I also would hate to be a regulator at the moment because, you just cannot keep up with the changing dynamics of the landscape. I think as AI kind of evolves, it magnifies that ability to kind of hone in and leverage personal data. So we've got as you said, James, it's a balance. What is that right balance for us? And just to pick up on something that Federico mentioned, I think certainly from our perspective at Interac, that balance has got to take into perspective, that trustworthiness. So kind of trust, and of course, we're talking about money. So safety and soundness is a key component to how we ensure that these great technologies, can come to market. So I think kind of treating the notion of privacy through the lens of trust, and kind of trust not only is a key component to society, but to every business and certainly to our industry. But I think that kind of looking at privacy and trust in a kind of through the lens of a more proactive process, perhaps. And I think, when you're looking at the regulatory landscape and all of the stuff that's been going on, whether it be through, Europe and the Payment Services Directive over the course of the last, 20 odd years, actually, I was involved in some of that in the UK a long time ago, that's evolved to PSD2, GDPR, data portability rights that we've seen in places like Australia. Obviously, the stuff that's been going on in the States, in California, and the Privacy Act, and within Canada, we had our federal budget yesterday with the appointment of a new data commissioner. I think there is so much going on that actually this balance is a massive opportunity for public and private sector to come together, because the regulators, they can't keep up, and it's not even appropriate. We almost need AI for just to help the regulators, right? Just a tool to help the regulators anticipate and model. I'm sure, Solon, you've probably got a tool ready to rock and roll for that. But I think there's a huge opportunity here for us to collaborate on this, as opposed to wait for legislation, because we know by the time legislation is ready, it's going to be less relevant because the technology will have already advanced. So, that kind of trustworthiness, I love that term, is definitely something that we need to be mindful of. And I think there is an opportunity here for some of the great minds certainly participating in this conference to help the regulators move forward.
Thank you for that, Debbie. I'm going to really pick up on 4 phrases that you mentioned. You had trust, privacy, massive opportunity, and then you started off with battleground. So Federico, given battleground, trust, privacy, massive opportunity, how do you navigate? How is an institution going to navigate? Because yes, it's getting much more competitive. Many more folks, many more organizations are entering this space. With everyone wants access to the data. The regulators have an extremely tough job. How are we going to navigate all this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, building off of what Debbie was saying, I think that this is the moment where folks can be proactive to create a strategic differentiation in the way they approach this, because this differentiation becomes a fundamental capability that financial institutions, of all types can be building. It's a muscle that you can be building that starts to become part of your essentially continuous improvement engine, redesign engine, and automation AI engines. But that flywheel needs to continue to accelerate. And if the places that are doing this well, I think, are doing what Debbie's articulating, which is, listen, you need to be able to have the right people and some of this talent around this, but you also need to have the frameworks and governance elements around this, that you start to view your AI across an enterprise and be able to start to validate where the trustworthiness exists or where you have higher degrees of confidence versus where you might have data issues or vulnerabilities and different levels of trustworthiness, and have a proactive approach that starts to say, these areas are green and we want to make this whole screen look green versus the yellows and reds. And we're going to have an approach that starts to do that systematically. And we can actually demonstrate that. We can communicate that to regulators in a proactive fashion. But we also use this as a way to transform our organization, because we start to be able to say, this is where we have impact using AI and automation tools. This is where we've redesigned and have a better understanding of our customers' needs. And this is where we house and securitize and broker data as financial institutions and keep it safe, which is, become a place and a role for banks to play, is not only just to, be the safe for everything else and money, but also be the safe for some of your data. And so there's a massive opportunity here that we're seeing that goes in conjunction with some of the data and regulation elements that we've mentioned. And in Canada, since a bunch of us are sitting in Canada, Bill C-11, all these elements that we've talked about, there's just an opportunity here to get ahead of it in a way that these financial institutions can be transforming to almost take advantage of this, but get closer to your customers, improve front to back through your distribution and operations to make this more seamless, be better predictors of where the vulnerabilities are, and also be able to better predict the trustworthiness itself of your AI models. This is model risk management of the future. And so we see this as a big opportunity, and a lot of players already starting to move on these governance frameworks.
Thank you for that, Federico. Jeremy, back over to you. So when we look at the space, who are financial institutions, banks, even the individuals that want to know more about this? Who are they to turn to? I mean, where are they getting their advice and their counsel? What are you doing? I mean, given where you sit, who are you turning to? How would you advise others in terms of getting this right and be able to be that trusted entity that folks are able to be comfortable with you doing the right things with their data, competing in the right way, and at the same time being able to take advantages of the opportunities.
I find the question on how do you get this right interesting. I'll just start off a little bit of a tangent and then come into the question. In the sort of starting in 2010 to 2015, I was deeply involved in the development of mobile payments in Canada, and ultimately, I guess what we end up using today. I was fortunate to be heavily involved in that process of what ultimately became the various pays that we use. And I remember, first of all, Canadian banking is incredibly incestuous. You tend to work with and meet with your peers and the various different institutions, not for competitive or anti-competitive reasons, but that's just the nature of the industry. I remember meeting with the fellow that led payments at another one of the big five banks and asking them, or him in particular, why are you not doing something? This bank's doing this, that bank's doing that, everyone's doing something, and you guys aren't. And he sort of looked at me and said, I think I'm going to wait to see how this whole mobile thing shakes out. I don't, in hindsight, what ended up happening was the big guys, the Googles and the Apples, swept in and dictated along with the payment networks and how mobile payments was going to work. So in the end, that experimentation may not have been necessary, and he looks quite prudent in hindsight. But I think AI is different. There's no, this is what it's going to be and this is what it's going to look like. This is all about experimentation and application to your institution's unique circumstance. And so I think my counsel is you got to get out there and play and play with purpose in specific areas of your business that you think you can transform, whether that's for cost reduction reasons or more targeted to certain areas where you think you're going to be able to outperform your competitors. And there are a whole host of providers. And of course, I'm not supposed to be plugs, but Mastercard, we engage directly with our clients, leveraging our internal capabilities that we've built over the last 20 odd years for ourselves, and working with our partners to help in very specific areas where it relates and where our engines are tuned. But get out there and play and experiment and work with advisors to see what works, I think would be my ultimate counsel. Thank
you for that, Jeremy. Solon, at AI Collaborator, we are all about collaboration. We're bringing large companies together with the startup companies and helping them go through a lot of these things, address some of the internal challenges, address some of the friction that's going on. What is your recommendation when your clients are asking you, how do we dive in? How do we take advantage of this opportunity at the same time understand that there are a lot of minefields still left to overcome? So
it starts. So funny enough, I'm a technologist. We deploy technology. We have a great AI technology startup. I also am a very active angel investor in other AI ventures. And right now looking at DeFi as a space I'm very interested in. And I can tell you, it all comes down to the same. It's the human factor. Like, technology is just a tool, right? But absolutely, what the gentleman before just said is completely true, right? Like, you have to go and play. But when you go play, do you have a champion internally? And do you have a clear understanding of what we did a blog post on this called ADKAR. I don't know if you heard that term before. Awareness, ADKAR. Awareness for the need for change, desire to support the change, knowledge on how to change, ability to demonstrate the skills and behavior, and reinforcement of the change in motion. Most large corporations fail at one or more of those items. So even if they might have the desire or the awareness they need for change, when it comes to knowledge, there's a knowledge gap right away. Like, a lot of noise around what AI can do and can't. Then do they have the team capacities to demonstrate the skills and behavior? So I'm a huge fan of PwC lately, because 3 years ago, they said, we're going to digitize our own internal finance team. And what they've done is, the first thing they did is they sent an app to train people on the level of digital native levels. So they basically went and polled their teams to see if they understood basic concepts around digital transformation before they even started thinking about doing anything. And that gives them the lay of the land, really understand which teams which we better placed from an understanding and knowledge standpoint before even reinforcing their skills and behavior to drive that change. So I think that's what most people underestimate. It's the people factor. As soon as you touch, I remember about 10 years ago, I was in a forum with a few ambassadors, and they said that the biggest driver of change in politics actually has not been politicians, but technological upheaval. When all of a sudden you have a third industrial revolution, a fourth industrial revolution happening, everything changes. And the human factor is what holds it back, adopts it, or turns it to Luddites. Like, that's really where we are today. And that ADKAR model, so you can go on the website, if you Google MindBridge and look at change management, we're very candidly sharing things that are not related to our product, just what we've learned going through those motions around change management in our. I always joke that we should spin out our customer success team as a management consulting firm for change management around AI, because they've been through it so many times.
Thank you, Solon. Appreciate that. Debbie, to you. If it's the people factor and you can't trust the people, and then you can't trust the models, where do you send your clients? What's your recommendation?
I love that ADKAR approach. I think there's enough desire out there, right? It's more around, like, how do you even approach this? What are the steps? How do you start it? What are the kind of milestones and the reinforcement? Love that. I think we're back to that kind of, the notion of experimentation. It all comes back to organizational strategy and I would say strategic foresight. So that notion of use the tools, use the technology, map out some scenario plans, think about what might happen in the future, and then bring it right back, because nobody's got there is no one answer, and we're not fortune tellers that we can depict exactly what's going to happen. So I think that notion of strategic foresight is a huge benefit to organizations. So that would be my advice, is have a mechanism to do those kind of safe experimentations and take a look at what the opportunities might be, both negative but also opportunistic.
thank you for that. And really thank you all. This has been a great conversation. We have just about a minute and a half left, and I want to give you all a chance to just sort of a lightning round. What are your parting thoughts? You have about 15 seconds. I'm just going to go around to each one of you. Starting with Solon, what are your parting thoughts about the industry and the opportunities that AI is creating?
Well, I'm the first one. That's a tough one. So my parting thoughts is that while it seems very overwhelming because a lot of changes, you just got to start. Like just start anywhere. And if it's just starting by reading about it, that's good enough. Just start educating yourself. You just remember that ADCAR model that I just talked about. Like just start somewhere, somehow. Just joining this panel and listening here is a good start. Just start somewhere.
Okay, just do it, just like Nike. Federico, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, similarly, I think there's an element that people would be missing the boat if they aren't starting. But to scale this, you need to be able to get out of pilot purgatory, if you will, and start to actually build an operating model change and transform major process journeys front to back, leveraging AI. And this becomes a strategic capability and differentiator that people need to harness. And so, it's doubling down once you start to bring that transformative power of AI into this mix.
Great. Thank you for that. Debbie.
I would say there are some incredible organizations out there. Go out and find them and collaborate. Even just reach out to the people on this panel. I'm sure even amongst the five of us, there's an incredible network of experts there that we can hook people into. So go out, use your network and collaborate with people who know a little bit more about this topic.
Being from an organization like AI Collaborator, I appreciate that. So thank you, Debbie. And Jeremy.
And thanks. And I'll take us back to almost where I started. I think with a lot of what we talked about today, Debbie spoke about the data, the open banking concepts, moving with AI and this concept of just do it. And then that Federico spoke around transform the organization to adapt to a model where you have AI in place. I think depending on who you are, do it also with some trepidation. If you are a large bank, we are at the precipice of, I think, what will be the great unbundling with all this coming together. And if you are at a startup, this is a massive opportunity to attack those profit pools.
Well, thank you all for your time. This is very exciting. We can go from industry to industry, and I'm sure there's the same types of conversations are going on, right? So I definitely got a lot out of it, and I hope everyone else too. But thank you guys for your time, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you to James and our fantastic panel. And just as James said there was some fantastic transferable advice, not only for you if you're in the banking sector, but across all sectors and industry.